The latest Eurozone bailout in Cyprus has highlighted a growing bitterness between Europe's poor southern economies and the continent's richer northern economies. Joining us now to detail what this mistrust means for the future of the Eurozone, in Albany, New York, Adam Lerrick. He's scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. And with us here in our studios, Costas Douzinas. He is professor of law and director of the Birkbeck Institute for the Humanities at the University of London, UK. And we welcome Adam, you in New York. And Costas, good to have you here in our studio. I want to start by just reading something, Costas, that you wrote in The Guardian last month. It goes like this: resistance against austerity and injustice is again in the air. In Italy, the overwhelming anti-austerity vote has shaken the parties committed to the Berlin orthodoxy. Large marches and rallies in Portugal and Spain have undermined governments and policies, and a new push for anti-austerity unity is emerging in Britain. Finally, the Cypriot government agreed to the unprecedented haircut of bank savings, but was forced to renege after MPs of all parties, under pressure from the public, voted against it, and ruling party MPs had to abstain. This was the first formal rebuff of austerity, something that the obedient governments of southern Europe had not dared. The words democracy and referendum create panic in the corridors of Brussels. But the symbolic value of a small nation rejecting the initial troika blackmail and protecting the savings of ordinary people is immense. The European debate has concentrated on the protection of savings. The protection of our democracy is perhaps more important. Okay, Costas, that sets the table for the discussion to come. So tell us why you think the anti-austerity argument is carrying the day in the South.
Over the last 20 or 30 years, a particular type of economic ideology or idolatry ruled the world. I mean, certainly the advanced world, here North America and Western Europe. It used to go by the name of neoclassical economics or monetarist policy. Now it has become neoliberalism. And that type of economic policy has failed at all levels. It has failed according to its own internal criteria. So, for example, in Greece, while only 3 years ago the IMF and the EU were predicting that today Greece would have gone back to the markets and that growth would have started again, Greece this year is experiencing a -6 growth, a total depression of 26% over 4 years, a 30% unemployment rate, and a 60% youth unemployment rate. So they failed. The IMF has accepted that their own calculations, the so-called fiscal multiplier, was totally wrong, underestimated the effect of austerity on growth by a factor of 3. So at all levels, even according to their own criteria, have failed. But then if we move to...
Well, okay, hold that for a second. I'm going to hold that there because I want to put that to Adam. Adam, would you share the view that the verdict on austerity is in and that it has failed?
Oh, absolutely not. First of all, just stepping back at one point, the Cypriot rejection of the first proposal had nothing to do with austerity. This rejection was not linked to any cuts in spending, any cuts in government benefits, any cuts in wages. It was simply a question of whether there would be a tax placed on depositors in the banking system. That was rejected, first because it imposed losses on ordinary Cypriot citizens who had small accounts, and it was rejected also by the business community because they were frightened that it would scare off their model of being an offshore banking center for the large accounts. So the Cypriot rejection of the first proposal had nothing to do with austerity. Costas has raised a different point, which is, are the austerity measures working in the other countries? And the answer is, they are working. It's just that the IMF and the Eurozone has greatly underestimated the time required to make the necessary adjustment. The problem in Europe has nothing to do with deficits and has nothing to do with debts. The debts can be easily written down, the deficits can be easily cut. The problem is that Southern Europe, the citizens of Southern Europe, expect a standard of living that their productivity cannot deliver. These people are going to have to be 20 to 40% poorer than they were 2 or 3 years ago. And that is a long, painful process that's going to take at least 5 and probably close to 10 years in order to achieve the necessary deflation.
Okay, let me put that to Costas. Austerity is working, it's just taking longer than people expected to.
I agree with Adam. Indeed, it's not about debt and deficit. Indeed, if anyone wants deficit and debt today, it is capital and the capitalists. Because precisely the way in which Southern Europe consumed the German goods over the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, 60% of the balance of trade of Germany is, of course, with the rest of the EU, the largest part with Southern Europe. It was precisely through loans that were given to people. The kinds of subprime mortgage problem in America was, in Europe, the subprime consumer problem. Given loans, debt-fueled consumption, and it was on that basis, on that totally wrong model of the European Union and the Eurozone, that the German prosperity and the Northern European prosperity was built. So just to finish, I think it is totally wrong and indeed a bit surprising to say that somehow over the last 2 years, the Northern Europeans discovered with feigned astonishment that the Southerns were living above their means. They knew that all along. They knew that all along. The loans that are given to Greece and the other countries in the so-called bailout agreements are loans that are being directly paid back to the German and French banks.
Okay, let us show some photos here, which some of which are fairly disturbing. These are from anti-bailout demonstrations in Cyprus, and some of them, as you will see, depict Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, as a Nazi. And perhaps, Adam, I'll go to you on this first. Why is Germany being singled out for this very hostile reaction?
Well, because Germany is viewed as the leader of the Northern Europeans. Germany is the largest economy in Europe. Germany is the country that is bankrolling all these bailouts. Germany is the country that is trying to drive Europe to the next level of integration, where there will be central fiscal control. So clearly, Germany is viewed as the bad cop. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other countries, the Netherlands, Finland, Luxembourg, Austria, and Denmark outside of the Eurozone, which agree with the German policies. But Germany is clearly viewed as the target because the whole key to driving Europe to a sound fiscal basis is the German ability to say no and make everyone else believe it.
And Costas, would you say that the Germans are tired of being portrayed this way as Mr. No, Mrs. No, however you want to put it?
When you have such a major crisis, as we're faced at the minute, which is a crisis of capitalism and a crisis of Europe, obviously racist feelings that exist in every population, I think, come up. I don't believe that either the Germans or the Greeks are particularly racist as nations, not the modern German people, not the Greeks. But of course, when you have such a destruction, such a humanitarian crisis, you always want to find a single enemy, a single cause for what is happening. Of course, Germany is an easy target in that sense.
Okay. Numbers don't always tell the whole story, but in this case, they really do tell quite a story. And we're going to bring this graphic up now that indicates what the unemployment rates are, the size of the economies. Here's unemployment in the euro. The blue lines refer to February of last year. The red bars refer to February of this year. And the story's not pleasant. Greece, higher. Spain, higher. Portugal, higher this year. Cyprus, much higher this year. Italy up a bit. France up a bit. Netherlands up a bit. Germany actually down a bit. Let's try to understand, Adam, to you first, what are the northern countries doing right that the southern countries aren't doing that make their economic numbers look better?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to start with the fact that 3 years ago, the numbers for Southern Europe were completely out of alignment. The countries were, the labor costs, the costs of production in Southern Europe were 30 to 40% higher than in Northern Europe. And the problem is the only way to bring those back into alignment in a monetary union where everyone shares a currency is by deflation. Normally what would have happened in these countries is they would have devalued their currency and wiped out their lack of competitiveness and restored their ability to produce in the world markets. When you're in the euro, they don't have that option. So the only other option is deflation. And deflation of the order of magnitude we're talking about. The IMF can claim they didn't understand the fiscal multipliers. They thought the adjustment would take place in 1 to 2 years. No economist that has studied past business cycles would ever have thought that you could bring down nominal wages by 30% in a 2-year period. To give you a benchmark, that the amount of deflation that's required in Greece today is greater than in the Great Depression in the United States. You are talking about a long, painful process. And that brings up all sorts of other questions about political and social acceptance. No one has ever tried to force a people to voluntarily accept this type of deflation.
Costas, what's your
Whether
view
they'll
on that?
succeed is another question.
Sure. Are the southern countries doing something particularly wrong here?
First of all, we do have a previous experience of that. Of course, that is the Weimar Republic. That is the Weimar Republic where we have pretty comparable unemployment rate and depression and depression in the economy. And of course, we know the result. And
Germany, 1930s, world went to war.
1930s, indeed. And as we know, we have a huge increase of the neo-Nazi and fascist movements in Greece, but also in other southern countries. And there is, it seems to me, a certain responsibility on the part of the Northern Europeans, particularly the Germans, to make sure that they don't create or they don't allow a social situation, a social crisis and social unrest to develop to such an extent that we may have similar developments. But I think
hang on.
Yeah.
Let me understand what you're saying
Yeah.
here. Are we saying monetary policy ought to take into account the fact that there are neo-fascists in the streets who may give rise to another race war around the world, and therefore we need to make policy based on that?
Of course, not just the neo-fascists, but the fact is that in democratic countries, the decisions are made by the people, not by the markets. And what we're seeing here, and it seems to me that this is, I have any difference with Adam's position so far, is that we have a contradiction developing between the wishes of the markets, particularly the financial markets, and the wishes of the people as expressed in democratic decision making. Now, if, as I think Adam said, if you cannot sell such a rapid and brutal, cruel deflation to people, you have to desist. And if they do not desist, then we have a major social and political problem, and this is what is happening in Southern Europe at the minute. And that is a responsibility, obviously, of the Greek political elites and the Greek political and economic system, but it is also the responsibility of the Europeans who impose these measures on Greece.
Sure. Let me come back at Adam with a question. That we look at the unemployment rates in places like Austria, Germany, Luxembourg. The unemployment rate in all of those places is hovering around 5%. By contrast, we're hearing these shocking numbers out of Greece and Spain, unemployment rates at over 25% in some cases. Portugal, 17.5%. Is it impossible to have social harmony when the gap in unemployment rates is that big?
Well, I don't think the question is social harmony between Germany, the German people, and the Greek people. The question is, can you have social harmony in Greece or in Spain with an unemployment rate of 25%? For young people, the unemployment rate is between 50 and 60% in those two countries, and it's going to head higher. These countries are not going to start growing again for another 3, 4, 5 years. And you're going to have large unemployment and people that are going to have been unemployed for 4, 5, and 6 years, which is a huge burden for society going forward. The problem is, what are the alternatives? There are basically two alternatives. One is the weaker countries leave the euro, go out on their own and create their own, restore their own currency and devalue, in which case they will then, in essence, restore their competitiveness immediately. They'll devalue their currency 50%, and suddenly they will be competitive in world markets and the economies will start to grow. But the people will still be 50% poorer. Whether they stay in the euro or they leave the euro, the countries of Southern Europe, the people of Southern Europe are going to be much poorer going forward. They can do it quickly through a devaluation. They can do it slowly through deflation and stay in the euro. The only other alternative to either long-term deflation or leaving the euro is a massive transfer from Northern Europe to Southern Europe. This is a problem. In essence, you would be taking German taxpayer money and sending it to Greece and Cyprus and Spain and Portugal, not as loans, but as cash.
Okay, Costas, of those options that Adam just listed there, do you think it is a viable option to have the weaker countries leave the euro, engage in this massive deflation in order to make them competitive again? Is that a viable option?
No, because there is a third and a fourth option. These are the two options from that particular type of political economy. And of course, there are other types of political economy. For example, that has been propagated by Krugman and Stiglitz, that which is being, at this point in time, applied in the United States, with Obama being well down the Keynesian route as compared with Mrs. Merkel. So there is a third route. Let me tell you a little story. In 1953, the victorious powers after the world had a conference in London, the famous London conference, in which they agreed to a huge haircut, up to 6% of the German debt, the war debt. They agreed to pump money in the German economy, the Marshall Plan, and they also agreed that the repayment of the remaining debt would be accompanied by a so-called development or growth clause, that the Germans would start repaying the debt once their economy started growing and in a ratio that followed that growth rate. Now, that is, it seems to me, an obvious third solution that would happen in Greece. And of course, there's a fourth solution. I think what we learned over the last perhaps 3 or 4 years, from the Arab Spring to Spain, to Greece, to the Occupy movement, is that the kind of political economy that has dominated the world over the last 20 years is now coming to its last legs. And this is the time that we can think imaginatively about a new type of democratic socialism. And I think Greece is leading in that way.
What does that mean?
And perhaps means a greater cooperative and collective enterprises. It means a central planning of the economy with nationalization of banks. It means allowing the people to take their fate in their own hands rather than having financial markets and hedge funds decide for them.
Okay, Costas has moved. Adam, do you want to second that motion?
Absolutely not. First of all, Costas outlined his first proposal as the third alternative is nothing more than a large transfer. In essence, what he's proposed, the countries, Greece and Portugal and Spain, cannot increase their fiscal spending on their own. They don't have the money, and they can't borrow the money. So the money has to come from outside of those countries, and probably what he's proposing is coming from Northern Europe. When he described a Marshall Plan, a forgiveness of debt, you're in essence talking about transferring a huge amount of money from Northern Europe to Southern Europe, which is the other alternative I discussed earlier. As for going back and basically dialing back the market economy and stopping financial markets from imposing discipline on borrowers, we've been focusing on Europe. You have to also think of where the market economies have succeeded enormously. If you look at countries like China, countries like India, their growth is due to turning to market economy policies. If you now decide to turn them back to where you're going to have the state control the banking system, the state control the large enterprises, you're not going to have the types of growth that have raised more than 1 billion people in Asia out of poverty over the last 20 years.
No, I appreciate that, but if you consider China, they don't have to worry too much about elections there. And we do have to worry about elections in the European Union. And to that end, Adam, how does a politician get elected and then re-elected when he's trying to sell the kind of platform that you're putting forward?
He can't. I mean, Jean-Paul Juncker, who is Prime Minister of Luxembourg, has a famous quote. He says, "We all know what to do. We just don't know how to get re-elected after we do it." That is the problem. And you are going to see a whole series of governments. You've already seen it. When the crisis came, you had the socialists in power in Spain. They implemented austerity reforms. They were thrown out, and the conservatives were put in power. Their now popularity is down because they've pursued the same fiscal adjustment policies. They're going to be thrown out. The same thing is going to happen in Greece. Same thing is going to happen in Italy. You're going to have a series of governments because each time the government is going to be forced to undertake policies the electorate doesn't like because they're painful, and they will then vote in a new government, which will then be forced again to follow the same policies. So you're going to see a rotating series of governments in all these countries over the next 10 years.
Costas, this seems like a terrible prognosis.
Yes.
Let me give you the last word to comment on it.
Thank you. But banks have been nationalized in reality. I mean, in the United States, in England, with the Royal Bank of Scotland and Northern Rock, of course, in Greece and Cyprus now, banks have been nationalized. We have a system in which private debt and banking debt becomes public debt. That is nationalization. We have socialism for the rich, so their losses become socialized, and communism for the poor. So what we're saying is that to the extent that the public, the taxpayer, is now carrying the debts of the banks and the bonuses of the bankers, they should also have a much more central say in the kinds of policies they pursue. This is nationalization. It's happened in reality. The formality is now missing, and therefore you need to change policies. It is not so much about following those policies and failing again and again and again. You have to rethink the policies. And I think this is now coming on the agenda, and it's coming on the agenda in a big way because people cannot take this kind of cure, this kind of poison cure any longer.
Where did you start your day today, can I ask?
The Toronto International. I just flew in from London this morning at 4 o'clock.
You don't seem jet-lagged at all. You were in fine form.
It was such a wonderful debate with Adam in Washington and you, Peter.
Adam Lerrick in Albany, New York, from the American Enterprise Institute. We thank you for being on the line there from New York. And Costas Douzinas, the professor of law and director of the Birkbeck Institute at the University of London, UK. We thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.